weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet we do not sin. Let us then approach God's throne with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in times of need. If you really follow that last part, it's God's symphony is the forerunner of our mercy and grace. What is the definition of sympathy? Sympathizing. Sympathy. That's what I said. When I read that, I said, what really is sympathy? It's to share, this is what Mr. Webster says, it's to share the feelings of others with the goal of helping that person. To share the feelings of others. How many times have you been in a trial, going through some storm or trouble in your life, and somebody comes up to you and says, in all sincerity, they'll say, I feel your pain. You had that happen? I think we all have, haven't we? Can they really feel our pain? Is it possible? Are they capable of doing that? I think that there's only one person that's really possible. But before I get into that, what does it take for someone to truly have sympathy for you and for me? Especially when we're weak, which is Hebrews talking about, and we can throw in sinning that we've talked about here in the last few talks. We could talk about suffering when you're in despair, depression, terrible time to go through, when you've lost a loved one, when you're terminally ill and you're dying, we're all going to die, and when you lose hope. So what does it take? Things that I was able to really search out and look at is what it really requires is that person has to totally understand how we feel. It means he has to have experienced the same thing we have experienced and feel the same way. Think how hard that is. Can you do that? I couldn't. It requires a deep, deep, intimate love for us. And that has to continue on through each stage of our trials or our storms that we're going through. It also requires an intimate relationship, a total commitment to whatever problems we're having, whatever trials we're going through. And it requires that they sacrifice all their times to my needs. Pretty hard to do, wouldn't you say? Yeah. I know I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. Now take a look at all of those verbs. To understand how we feel, to love, a relationship, commitment, sacrifice. If you were to put a meaning to that as it relates to us humans versus as it relates to the Lord, to Jesus Christ himself, you would have to use a different language. We couldn't use the same words because we're not capable of doing that. Only one person is capable of doing that, and that's Jesus Christ. About the closest you can really come to really sympathizing is maybe a mother with her child. And I don't even mention the fathers because I just don't even think that we can make the grade. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, but they try.
We do try. Thank you for giving me credit for that. Yeah, that's a good point. I do have to count on it. But sometimes we do fall short. That is true. So I had a couple questions that I had to follow on that particular part. Is how is it possible for Jesus, who is now sitting on the right hand of God in heaven, to sympathize with us? That sounds like a childish question. But for many unbelievers, that's a big deal. He's up in heaven. That happened a long time ago. And that's a problem for many, many non-Christians. And I'm going to attempt to answer that. And more important for us is why. What is his ultimate plan and purpose for us? Okay, that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And it really ties into a lot of the songs that we've been singing this morning, or the hymns. To truly understand the whys and the how God sympathizes with us, we have to look at the big picture. And what I want us to do today is to just kind of broaden our perspectives. Not here in Junealaska. I want us to broaden it all the way back. And the only place to start is in Genesis 1. Okay, we're going to be here for a while today, so get ready. Okay, we're going to start in Genesis 1. And what does it say in Genesis 1? We all know the words, the first words of the Bible. God created. In the beginning, God created. He created what? Did he just create Earth? No, he created the entire universe. Think about this. He created it in perfect order. That's what it says, perfect order. I mean, if you're a scientist, or if you've ever gone through and just kind of looked at the way that the Lord put the sun, the moon, the stars, and everything, and the amount of oxygen that we have, it's just amazing how the order to which he created this. He designed it for who?
Us.
For us. He also designed it for himself, didn't he? For his glory. He then, after he created the universe, what did he do next? Created man, right? How did he create him? He created him in his image and his likeness. Body, mind, and spirit. And then he gave him free will. We talked about that quite a bit these last few times. And here's where I want you to concentrate. What did he do after that? He walked with them,
Yes.
man and woman, where? In the garden. Where is he today? Is he walking with us?
Yes. In the Holy Spirit.
Just like a father walking with his children. Then the question comes of why? Why is he doing this? What is his ultimate plan and purpose for us? Well, first thing, of course, comes in, we have to say that he loves us. We know he loves us. We've talked about that all weekend, and we keep talking about it, and we should. But to really understand why, I think that we have to understand God's original intention. And we have to remember this and walk with this. It's just going to make our life so much easier. And we have to remember that his original intention was to have an intimate relationship with all of us. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
That's his main purpose for creating everything. That's why he walked with us in the garden. We're the ones that screwed it up. And now he's going to fix it. And that brings us to Genesis 3. That's when sin entered the world. That's when we turned our backs on him and rebelled. But does he give up? He doesn't give up. He's still walking. We're the ones turning our backs on him. And as in Hebrews, he said, he sympathizes with our weaknesses. That's why we did rebel. It's our weaknesses. And he's with us just as we are. And in the Old Testament, we have to then go to the Old Testament. And what did he do after that? What was the beginning of his plan? He sent prophets, right? He sent Moses, Isaiah, Daniel, go through all of them, the whole Old Testament. When I was first challenged by a good friend of mine to read this book, and I started going through with all these prophets and the names and so forth, going through, and he says, I asked him, why should I read this book? Who's the author? and gave it to me, and he says, God. And when you think of how God has planned everything out. Faye, could you put that other slide up? This is hard to read, but what I did was I went back and I made a little timeline. I'm a civil engineer and I just love figures and numbers, and you're going to have to bear with me just a little bit on this. But I went back, and if you really look at that, it starts with Abraham, as it should. And what I did was I laid out all of the years, 2,200 years ago, Abraham. We have Moses coming in about 1,500 years and going through all the prophets, going through then Jesus' time right down at the bottom. And there we are, right there at the little end there. You see that guy waving to you? That's you. And with all of the time that we see, we can see where Scripture was written, how far that went, 1,541 years it was written over that entire period. And there we are, just little old us all by ourselves in the 2000 or 2300. You will note as you go through the Old Testament that God's purpose all the way through that was to sympathize with his children. Let's have a quick rundown of some of the things that he did do. First, he frees his children from slavery, right? And what I'd like you to do is to kind of think about this and put yourself, because what we're talking about during all of that time is our ancestors, aren't we? We always think of us now, but these people, we say that my ancestor was, back maybe 200-300 years, and you can identify them, but you can go all the way back to 2020 before Christ. That's your ancestors. That's us. Put yourself in your place. Just humor me during this period that I'm up here. So we see him freeing our children in slavery. He frees his children, and they start walking through the desert. What's he do? He sends manna down. They're hungry. He sends manna. He gives them water. That's us. That's what the Lord did. He could have just wiped us out, but he didn't. He keeps on staying with us because he wants a relationship. He even disciplines his children, right?
Right.
And why does he do that?
To make us more like him.
So we can be holy, right? He has to. He has to discipline. He has to get our attention because that's his purpose. He can't have a relationship with us if we're not holy. Here's another thing as I read through the Old Testament that I really like to see is note whenever you go through any of the prophets, what do you see over and over and over again is, and the Lord said to Isaiah, and the Lord said to Moses, over and over. How many times does he say that through the Old Testament? I have no idea, but that would be a good study to have. How many times does he say that all through the Old Testament? So why did he be with those people all that time, taking care of them and so forth? It was to guide his children to himself, right? And he's doing that all the time because we are made in his image. And he continues because of his original intention of having a relationship with us. Just as he had with us while we were in the garden. No different. I think one of the best examples that we could give is the lost son, the prodigal son. Think of that story and put yourself in there. Everyone in here is the son, okay? You've gone up to your father, and who's the father? God, Jesus. He's the father. Just put that picture in your mind. You go up to him and you say, I want my inheritance now. What are you really saying? I wish you were dead. I want to continue with my life the way I want to do it, not the way you want to do it. I don't want to stay here in the garden with you. I want to go out on my own. I don't need you. That's what he's saying. So off he goes, and God gave us free will. We go off, and what do? We blow it. And he blew it really good. He blew it to such an extent that after he left his father, he squandered everything that his father had given him. He worked so hard for him. I had a friend that I went to college with. He was a roommate of mine. And he was very, very wealthy. His parents were very wealthy. He wasn't. And right after college, he did the exact same thing as this prodigal son did. And I followed him for a while, and we corresponded and so forth. And you have never seen anybody's life go down into a spiral to just dead end. His wife divorced him. He lost his children. And I mean, he was really in bad shape. And no different than our little friend right here, all of us. And he got very lonely. He was starving, eating with the pigs. That's about as low as you can get. And what did he do after that? He started to think about his father. Boy, I had it good. And he remembered his father. And he decided that he was going to go back and ask for forgiveness. And here's the part that I like. He started to go back, and he looked down the path, and who did he see? His father, waiting for him there. How long was he waiting? A long time. How did he know he was coming back that day? That's what I love about this story. He didn't know. He was waiting, and here comes his son. And what's he do? Just stand there and wait for his son to get to him? He runs full speed towards his son. They wrap each other. Can you just imagine how that felt? That's how it's going to feel for us. He's going to wrap his arm around him, and he started laughing, and I could just picture jumping up and down, rolling in the grass, just having a great time. Put a good robe on him, cooked a great meal, put his best robe actually. And he said, my son was dead, and now he's alive. That's going to be us. Isn't that amazing? To me, I get so excited about that. But, don't forget what happened here. The son had to go back to the father. If he didn't, he would have still been eating and sleeping with the pigs, just like us. So that's really, when you think of the Father there, that's the heart of the Father. That is our God. This brings us then to the New Testament. And I just want to go over a few things here in the New Testament that are so important in this chapter about sympathizing with us. Think of Jesus. Jesus then, in the beginning of the New Testament, it tells, and what I wanted to say too was that one of the things that the Lord gave us was not just the prophets, but he also gave us his word, didn't he? And that is so important, is when you think of, here is a God who created the entire universe, and he gives us the word, he gives us his plan of salvation all the way through it. And he tells us how he's going to be with us and sympathizing with us. But Jesus comes to earth as a child into a fallen world after living in eternity past. He creates man, we already talked about that, in his image. And he is truly our Father. He experiences every temptation and weakness in every way that man has ever suffered. Think about some of the things that the Lord went through before he went to the cross even. His hunger, rejection, scorn, false accusation, torture, and here's a bad one, loneliness. Is there anything worse than loneliness? I mean, I'd rather have cancer or anything than really being lonely. I think that must be awful. Because here, his children, which is all of his disciples, all of them left him. Just John was there at the crucifixion. And while he was up on that cross, when he looked out, and before he went onto the cross, he heard the cries of his children. Think of yourself hearing the cries of your children. Crucified. Crucified. His own children saying that. And then the disciples fled. How would you handle a situation like that? And while he was on the cross, what did Jesus do? You talk about sympathizing. This is just amazing. Jesus looks down at the crowd. He spots John. And what does he say? John, take care of my mother. He's dying on the cross. And he's still sympathizing and looking at his people, looking at us. Then he looks to the right, to the criminal on his right. And remember, that's the criminal who professed that Jesus was God. And that criminal asked Jesus, remember me when you come to your kingdom. Remember me when you come to your kingdom. And what was Jesus' answer? You remember that?
Today you will be in paradise.
Today you will be with me in paradise. And that's what we're talking about. That is what he wants for all of us. And when we go through trials and we go through tribulations and all, if we were just to focus on that, today you will be with me in paradise. And then this is my favorite verse. Because I have prepared a place for you in heaven. And if it were not so, I would have told you. He's got a place for us in heaven. What could we worry about when we know we have that? For all eternity, we're going to be with him. I know it's tough when you're going through a rough time and all, but I think it becomes easier if we can just remember. A lot of times I think our perspective is just a little too closed and we get focusing on the wrong things. If we were to focus on the Lord when we're going through these trials and tribulations, and there's one thing that I have up on my desk, a little card that I always try to remember, is that, as you know, Nina and I used to sail a lot. And you're sailing, you hit a lot of storms. Oh boy, did she hate the storms though. Oh my goodness. And Bob, why did you go out? Why did we have to go into the storm? You can just imagine. I can tell you some stories. She's sitting right over there. I don't want to do that. But one thing that I do remember though is saying is when you go through the storms, don't focus on the storm. You want to be miserable. Focus on the storm. I mean, that's the wrong place to focus. You will make yourself so, oh man, it's just something that you'd be so upset. Focus on the maker of the storm. And it is true. I can tell you some stories, especially with me coming up, praying, all of a sudden seeing the sun coming up, getting everything under control. It's happened so many times. And I think that that's really what the Lord wants us to do. And I think we have to remember this too, that after the resurrection, what did the Lord do? Here's one thing that jumps out at me. Is after the resurrection, the first thing that he did after he was alive again, he was on the beach. You remember that? And what did he do at the beach? He made a little fire, got some fish, and he called Peter. Now what did Peter do? Peter had denied him 3 times. The first thing that Christ did was go to the beach and feed Peter. Isn't that wonderful? That's the sympathy, I think, that we're talking about today. And of course, for us, we know that what he did was to fill us with his Spirit. And that's what we have living in us today. And when we go through those trials, we focus, but we should know that he is not just right there with us, but he's deep, deep down in our heart because he loves us. Right? Doesn't that make it easier though when we're suffering? If we could just remember. It says so many times through the Old Testament and New Testament, remember, remember. I think that's what we have to do. I think that's the best way when we're going through these hardships. I really do. And let me just close here. You thought I was going 3 hours, didn't you? Okay. How did I feel? Is that right? Good. Okay. So again, let me just repeat. I believe that God's ultimate goal for us is to prepare us for eternity. And just kind of look through things as you're walking, looking at the beauty and so forth that we talked about today, is just think about where we're gonna go, where our true home is. This is not our home. We're gonna go through some rough times here. He's not gonna correct every one of them. That's not his plan. But no, he has a plan. That's the thing that's gotta really make you feel good. Agree?
Great.
And just remember this, that when we walk through life, Jesus is there with us. And it says in Hebrews, in every way, sympathizing with us. Do you feel his presence? We should feel his presence. He's holding our hand. We're walking through the garden, he's holding our hand. To me, that's exciting. Even when we walk through the storms, he's there. Just like a father holding the hands of his son. He's still walking with us. And that's what we have to remember. We can't lose the sight of that he is right there. I remember I had a friend one time, and I was telling him I was just having a little problem in my prayer life when I was a new Christian. And he says, this is what you do. You get a chair, put that chair right down in front of you. And when you pray to the Lord who's sitting right there in that chair. It makes it a lot easier. Ever try that? We'll do that sometime. So the key for the Lord is the relationships. And sometimes we get discouraged because we think too small. So during those times, I just want us to broaden our perspective and remember to focus on God. His total vision, all the way through, from the beginning to end. And when you read it, put yourself in that place and you're going to feel a lot better. Look at some of the things that they went through. They were our ancestors. You think we have it tough. Focus on God's total vision and his agenda for us from eternity past to eternity future. And that is what will lead us to mercy and grace and into the place he has prepared for us. What a relationship we do have with our living God. Wouldn't you say? His heart is bound up in ours. Are we not truly blessed?
Amen.